So, as I said, this is episode 2 in our Home Truths 2 Race Equity series. Home Truths 2 is a partnership between ACEVO and Voice for Change England. And if you go to the website, you can catch up on episode 1 and all the resources that went with that as well. I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Sanjeev Lingaya, who is the co-creator of Home Truths 1 and 2 and the race equity lead for the current programme today. And our 2 special guests, we've got Wilf Sullivan, former race equity officer at the TUC, and Zoe Kabir, who's head of EDI at Macmillan Cancer Support. So at this point, I'll hand over now to Sanjeev to take us into the main part of the conversation.
Thanks, Jonathan, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to kind of share this session with you, and very happy that you're here. With Home Truth 2, what we're trying to do is get really practical about how is it that mainstream civil society organisations can take serious action on anti-racism for race equity. And as many of you will know, there's been an extra imperative, I think, since the murder of George Floyd and the disproportionate impacts that we saw during COVID, for civil society to do more on anti-racism and race equity. However, what we know is attention is not the same as action. And so at Home Truth 2, with colleagues, we're very much focused on supporting practical action. And as Jonathan says, this is episode 2. And it's about one of the recommendations in the original Home Truths report, which came out in 2020. And the focus there was on that organisations should annually measure, report, and respond to ethnic pay gaps. And the reason why we called for that measure then, and we call for it now, is because pay is one of the important sites where mainstream civil society's racism problem can show up. It's also, of course, vital because money matters, particularly during this kind of cost of living crisis and the various crises that we seem to bounce between. And because measuring pay gaps, I think, helps us to understand the extent of the problem. And as a wise man once said, James Baldwin, nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so this is about kind of facing into the issues ahead of us. So before I say a little bit more on the theme, I just want to briefly introduce our 2 excellent speakers, Zoe Kabir from Macmillan Cancer Support and Wilf Sullivan, former race equality officer at the TUC. So if I start with Zoe first. Zoe is head of equity, diversity and inclusion at Macmillan Cancer Support. And I met her for the first time about a month ago. We were both speaking at Third Sector Magazine's conference at the Barbican. And, you know, cheeky chappy as I am, I asked her if she would join us here. And I promised to come and speak by way of exchange at one of her events. So Zoe started the role in January 2024, and Zoe's responsible for overseeing the development and delivery of Macmillan's EDI strategy, ensuring that inclusion is at the heart of everything that the organisation does, from the support Macmillan provides and how it works with its network of over 10,000 healthcare professionals, to the way Macmillan raises money and the internal culture that it nurtures. Will Sullivan, who some of you on this call I know will already know. Will worked at the TUC from 2004, leading on race equality policy inside and outside the trade union movement. Before joining the TUC, Will worked with young people involved with the criminal justice system and in personnel dealing with recruitment and equal opportunities monitoring. And I do recommend, if you search his name and add Red Pepper magazine, there's a nice profile about Wilf in Red Pepper. So I'll welcome you both. I'll just get you to wave at this point. I'll go through some of the stuff but these are the stars of our show. Right, Christabel, who's also the other unsung star, because Christabel has done an amazing amount of research into this subject. probably ought to be here where I am. But yes, maybe I think the next time we'll put Christabel in front of the camera because she's done an amazing job. So back to ethnicity pay gaps. So the first thing I suppose to think about is what it is. So we describe it as the average hourly earnings of Black and minoritized ethnic people compared to white people. Um, and just to let you know, so ONS data shows from 2012 to 2022 that South Asian workers earn 1.9% less than white workers, while Black employees faced the largest gap, earning 5.6% less. And that's over in the overall economy. For the charitable sector, for the 27 top charities by income who did report on their ethnicity pay gaps, there was a median ethnicity pay gap of 22% in favor of white staff. So what this means is that if the median white member of staff earns £25,000, that would translate into a figure of 19,500 for Black and minoritized ethnic staff member. So quite a significant difference still there. So the second box in this box of three is about the surface drivers. So on the one hand, the presenting problem is the crowding of Black and minoritized ethnic people into relatively low paid roles and occupations. So that's a surface level reason. So that's the kind of technical reason. But we also have to look at some of the deeper drivers. And pay in the moment is affected by kind of historical issues such as family wealth, qualifications, as well as ideas of excellence, like what excellence looks like, who ought to be recorded, which often is kind of gendered, racialized, and so on. And nationality has a big effect. So a sense of kind of xenophobia being at play, and of course workplace racism as well. So these are all factors driving that disparity that I spoke about. Christabel, can we go to the next slide, please? So this very beautiful slide, we with all of the episodes of the race equity series, we produce a document subsequently, and so you will get this in what we call our companion notes. So it's very beautiful. I'm not proposing to go very much into detail because this isn't maths class. But if anyone wants to kind of raise issues about the how of the calculation during discussion, please do. So can we go to Christabel to the next slide? So our focus is what are the possibilities of measuring ethnicity pay gaps for driving anti-racist efforts in the sector and promoting race equity. So there are some pluses and there are some things that we just need to be mindful of. So on the one hand, it is rather helpful for transparency. So it offers us a better understanding of what is going on in terms of pay disparity, who's valued, how Black and minoritized ethnic people, employees, workers are situated in civil society and beyond. So the transparency thing is, we think, helpful. The second point is really about owning racism. So for the organizations who are calculating and then subsequently, and we'll come to this in the conversation, especially when we talk with Zoe, those who are calculating and reporting, there's something I think quite powerful there, because the institution is saying that these disparities or these arrangements of who gets paid what are kind of by design. And so with a bit of distance, a bit of reflection, a bit of considered effort, we can redesign that to more to reflect goals of equity. So there's something about owning racism. And then the third box on the right, the pink box, is I think ethnic pay gap calculation tells us something about or helps us with a larger discussion, which is really about equal pay culture. I think it raises important questions on pay openness, so how transparent within organizations we are about who gets paid what. It also, I think, makes us think about institutional hierarchy, and in some ways civil society is quite hierarchical. Many civil society organizations are, so I think it encourages us to think about that. And I think the other thing that it really makes us think about with regards to equal pay culture, and one of the reasons for inviting Wilf along today, is that it invites us to think about trade union organizing, and how does Labour organise collectively in order to drive kind of an equity agenda. So there are limits too. So like all of the episodes in the race equity series, none of these on their own kind of does the big fix. Some of the issues are upstream, so things like, so when an employer has a candidate in front of them or an employee in front of them, there's a lot of stuff that's already happened. So their previous work experience, their educational attainment, some of which is classed and gendered and racialized. So you can't fix everything in one go, but we do know that the workplace can itself be a site of xenophobia and racism. And in the workplace, we can rethink what contribution looks like and what excellence looks like. So there are things that can be done in the workplace, which are kind of very present issues. The calculation is not great on specificity. So particularly by this category, as many of us will discuss over time, of Black and minoritized ethnic, that lumps together a lot of different populations, some of whom have similar experience, some that are dissimilar. For example, the ONS data we spoke about before, where Black workers compared to South Asian workers were experiencing different kind of disparity. And even within the South Asian category, there are experiences between, for example, Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities that may well be different from those of Indian populations. And the third one, which is a take-up question. So take-up is low, as we mentioned. I think there's only about 27 of the top 100 charities by income report currently. And the new government, the Labour government, is proposing to make this compulsory for organisations with 250 or more employees, but across the whole economy, that only covers about 40% of the workforce. So, there's lots of people who won't be covered by that requirement. And the Equal Pay Alliance talks about having calculations and making them mandatory for organizations employing 50 people or more. So that gets you much kind of further reach in terms of workforce experience. So I suppose the conclusion from this slide is we think it's vital and necessary to kind of move forward, to shine a light, to own the problem that we have in the sector. But of course, this on its own is not going to guarantee an anti-racist future. Another reminder, you'll get the calculation and some more kind of nuanced discussion in the companion notes that will follow this episode. But now, without further ado, I'm probably behind. I'm very terrible at timekeeping, as my colleagues remind me. We will hand over to Zoe and to Will. And maybe before I kind of just offer any questions to the two of you, just to ask if there are any kind of initial things, glaring issues in terms of things I didn't say about your kind of background or kind of initial kind of opening thoughts. Maybe Zoe, can I start with you first? Any just initial reflections before we go into kind of more specific questions?
Yeah, I think for me, if we get it right in terms of business, we can have influence on wider societal issues and what's accepted and what's not accepted. So there's a real call, I think, for the wider business community, regardless of whether it's regulated or not, to robustly report pay gaps, not only obviously for Black and ethnic minorities, and communities, but for other intersectional groups as well. Because it's a bit like, when you're in the office and, you don't talk about wages, you don't know what your mate's being paid, and you're doing the same job. It's very similar. So, we have to treat it as a tool for broader systemic improvement. And that's why we're doing the work. It's not just about having a great organisation, it's about having a great society.
Thanks, Zoe. We'll come back with some more specific things. Wilf, is there anything you want to say just in the kind of opening before we begin to look at some of the issues in a bit more detail?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things really. I mean, one, I think we have to understand that, the British labour market is racialised, and actually what all ethnic pay gap reporting does is show that there's a problem institutionally with the way that people get paid, and race is part of that. I think, secondly, the question of, well, why don't people do it? It takes me back to the Business Commission report back in 2007 by the National Equality Panel. They'd done a survey of 1,000 employers asking why didn't they do stuff around race equality. About 42% couldn't say why, right? 61% didn't recognise the connection between diversity and equality in their business performance, right? And 83% didn't believe that if they did anything would happen to them, which is more to the point that without some kind of regulatory framework and enforcement, why is anybody going to do this? Only a small minority of companies do this. And there's a cost to doing equality in the workplace. Everybody likes to not talk about the fact that actually this does cost money, but it does. And the final thing I was just going to say in terms of the reasons that you articulated about why this pay gap, and it also relates to discussion around gender pay gaps, really. It is the question of pay for equal work of equal value, right? And the way that actually it's not only the fact that black workers are crowding, we find them at the bottom of the workforce in certain kinds of jobs, but those particular jobs are low valued. And I'll put it crudely: anything that requires caring for people or providing services to people is low valued in the way that work is valued. Anything which is about telling people what to do and making money is high valued.
Yeah, and I think there was a moment in COVID, I don't know, we were clapping various people and saying thank you to the supermarket workers and so on. Yes, that kind of that moment does seem to have passed a bit, doesn't it? All right. Thanks both Zoe and Will for those kind of opening thoughts. Really kind of interesting and helpful. Maybe we could just kind of delve a little bit more deeply. Maybe I'll go back to Zoe again first. So just kind of seeing what the mechanics in the workplace are, kind of what's happening in some organizations when we do see that Black and minoritized ethnic workers are ending up on the wrong side of the pay gap. Zoe, do you have any kind of reflections on, kind of just like the choreography of that and how that seems to kind of reproduce itself?
I mean, it's hugely multifaceted, but obviously going to what Will has said, there's some systemic issues at play. You then got even down to where the recruitment adverts are placed. I work in a charity, and for years they were placed in the Guardian. Lovely, very good. And we know that then you pull down your particular group of people that are even going to see or be recruited to the advert. You've got some, certainly some challenges then once you do recognise we're not in the right places, we're not talking to the communities, we're not really engaging in a way. But is it an attractive offer? If you've already got a trust issue within various communities, why on earth would they want to come and work within organisations that have got, like we've been going through change, that's got probably a reputation to be kind of, well, yeah, you're a white middle class organisation. That doesn't feel like a home, a place that I want to be. Once you get through those barriers and start to break them down, you've then got the issue of going through selection criteria. Does that actually fit? What does that look like? Traditionally, it's been an interview with a group of people that don't reflect who you are, don't really have a knowledge of where you come from, what additional skills that might actually provide, what benefit that could provide. So you're already kind of on a bit of a back foot. And that, I'm going to be really honest with you, Macmillan has had to face up to say that we have been not great at that. And there has been a line management issue when making decisions about recruitment. That then comes down to the line manager making decisions about how much to offer within a pay band. And going back to Will's piece about value and value of work and value of humans and what that does to actually create that pay gap in the first place. But the other thing that I've got to say is that we've almost been, I've talked a lot through my tenure about why aren't we asking for more? What is it that is stopping us? Is it something systemic? Is it a barrier organisationally? What can we do? And some of it is kind of barriers with our ability to feel valued in an organisation. So if I'm suddenly asking for more, potentially, does that put me at risk? Am I seen as a troublemaker? What does that feel like for me? Am I expected to ask for more or just accept that I'm lucky to be here? And all of those things we're actually trying to really break down and say it's much more than just a process. It's about recognising how people are experiencing their own value within the cycle and their worry, because you've got that tentative kind of tension that's happening between, gosh, I've got a job, I'm here, great, and then the ability to be empowered and have agency to ask for more. And that is something that we're really wanting to tackle.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point. And I suppose that individual loading of the problem back onto those, whether it's kind of women, non-binary people, people living with disabilities who are often on the wrong side of the pay gap, that's a really important one. I'll maybe bring you in, Wilf, here, because obviously part of trade union organising, and I noticed we've got the vote with the GMB in Coventry with recognition potentially at Amazon. Yeah, just will maybe kind of talk to me a little bit about the potential for collective organising to carry a bit more of the load that Zoe was describing, where people on the wrong side of kind of pay gap, on the wrong side of being valued, what there is, what collective organizing can do in those circumstances.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that has happened a lot over the past few decades is we always we've ended up in this conversation about this is almost like an individual issue, right? And many of the solutions that, I've seen around the business world have been almost like a deficit model. Well, actually, which is based on the fact that, well, if black workers aren't getting on in the workplace, it must be something to do with them. Either they haven't got enough education or networking or, and often a lot of the feature has been on, well, how do you get people into the workplace, and not talk about what happens to people when they are actually in the workplace, which is a major issue. So one of the things that I tried to do over the years is to get people to support each other through their trade unions and actually talk about this. So I remember right years ago about racism being the best kept secret in the workplace. And even if I, you know, was at a meeting of black workers and said to people, how many people are suffering from racism in the workplace? A lot of people would put up their hands. And if you said, how many people did you know that the person next to you was? Nobody would put up their hands. So, you know, the problem is this, what people's workplace experiences isn't discussed in the workplace. And certainly it isn't discussed by generally by black workers unless trade unions create that opportunity to do that, and it isn't discussed more generally. And I think that's that's one of the roles that unions can bring. I mean, obviously, you know, I mean, unions are all about wealth redistribution from the top downwards, basically. So unions playing their part in and this is really important. And for me, when I was at the TUC, I said to unions, well, actually, what you need to do is support ethnic pay gap reporting because for two reasons. One, that it opens up the possibility of a framework of more comprehensive monitoring, because if you're not looking at things like recruitment, promotion, who gets training, what happens in appraisals, then you can't come up with an action plan to deal with the problem that's been highlighted. But secondly, and I think Zay mentioned it, was the problem about the lack of transparency. You know, actually, if employers don't know what's going on and other people don't know what's going on in relation to how the workplace is structured, then actually people can ignore it. So one of the things for me about trade unions was about saying to people, you need to get that information, whether it's ethnic pay gap reporting or whatever it is, and actually tell your members, tell the workforce. Because, I mean, one of the things that has been apparent in terms of just gender pay gap reporting is that many women, even though their companies might publish the information, don't know it. The companies don't tell them what the gender pay gap is. You know, if people don't know what the problem is, they can't act on it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm reminded of my first job out of university was the New Economics Foundation, and I remember the famous Z Drive. So on the Z Drive, you could find everyone's salary, and we talked a lot about from the director to the person on the lowest salary was like 2 to 1 or 2.2 to 1, and it's really quite interesting how, yes, as you say, Wilf, pay negotiations seem to become much more individualized, and so I think that's interesting. So I think, and the Equal Pay Alliance talk about it as the equivalent of the Z Drive, which is much more kind of openness and talking about this, because for example, you mentioned kind of gender pay gaps, kind of often that it's that kind of those quiet corners where those those gaps can be hidden. I'm going to move. Thank you both. I'm going to move on to Zoe because Zoe and Macmillan Cancer Support are in an interesting place with regards to calculating ethnic pay gap. So and some of the people on this call may be at mainstream organisations who are slightly kind of struggling with this issue or thinking through it, and it maybe is a bit of a scary thing to kind of put this data in the public domain. Although I think it should be scarier not to deal with the issue, but that's just me. So Zoe, do you want to just say a little bit of where Macmillan is at in terms of ethnic pay gap reporting? Because I think it's gender pay gap reporting because it's mandatory for the organisation of your size.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a huge internal cycle of pay gap reporting. The only one we publish, you're quite right, which talks a lot to the mandatory bit, is the gender piece, but we internally report to all of our colleagues and across the organisation, disability, ethnicity, sexuality pay gaps as well, and we're looking to expand that a little bit more as we go. In 2023, we want to publish, by the way, caveat that I should say this, so we're prepping to publish, so we're a bit ahead. We conducted a root analysis of our pay gaps, because what we were looking to do is to say, what are the relationships between all of the pay gaps? Are there any thematics? Are there any things that we can really understand about what we have done as an organisation that we need to be honest and talk about? What do we need to face up to? And the first thing that we need to do is to know what we need to face up to in a really easily understood way, so people can see the data and the impact. We found that people were, like I said, more likely to be offered lower salaries, firstly. People were less likely to challenge that, and that was an issue because we didn't give a place of challenge. We weren't clear on our process. So what we found talking to our colleagues were, there's a section of the community that were very, no, I'm not happy with that, give me more, I'm valued at this, white men, you can probably imagine. But because that wasn't a policy, nobody knew, and here's the negotiation point, didn't know. HR interventions around point of hire were highlighted as well, as discussed. There were no clear guidance around diverse recruitment panels. So, like I said, you were often recruited by quite a homogenous group of people. So we've really had to face into some big challenges. Career development opportunities then inside were, if you then look at what happens when you entering into it, then we had a discussion about, what about succession planning? What about talent acquisition? What about how do people progress? And we're doing a bit of work, or done a bit of work now, around career progression and what the issues were around career progression. And again, it's the same issues for a number of group of people. So this isn't a issue that affects a group. This affects groups more deeply in some cases, absolutely. But this is an us problem, and we need to fix it. So we have done quite a lot to start to have very honest, very difficult, very challenging conversations. And how we always describe it internally is we're showing each other the mirror of what our decisions look like and have looked like. And we've committed, as you know, through our strategy and through our work, we're becoming a very different organisation, that is never going to happen again. And that's our commitment. And we need to face up to the fact that we have not been the best, but we now want to be the best in class. And we want to innovate around the sector. We want to do new things. We may get it wrong, but we want to try.
Thanks, Zoe. That's so helpful. And I think this idea of things have been the way that they were by design is, I think, a really important, that they don't just kind of happen. I think but also when one acknowledges that, I think there's possibilities of redesigning. So there's plenty more we could talk about, but I do want to open things up. Jonathan, are you going to filter some discussion points our way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people have been listening intently and taking it all in. And so I'd really encourage colleagues to, if you've got questions or comments, please either pop them in the chat box, or if you prefer, just to pop your virtual hand up, or a real hand if your camera's on. We can come to you to take your questions.
About civil society and like civil society and unions, there's kind of like we're a bit odd in that regard. I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong. But civil society is the in theory the do-gooding bit of the economy and so on. But maybe as for lots of reasons to do with how our labour market more generally has developed. I'm not sure what union penetration is in civil society, but it kind of feels like it's not where it might be. Do you have any reflections on that, and maybe kind of more generally about union density in the labour market?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do. I mean, having been involved in civil society myself and been a trustee of a number of organisations over the years, and I mean, I think trade union density in civil society organisation and the voluntary sector isn't where it should be. And it's weird because I've come across a lot of organisations where you say to people who are in a union and they say, "Hey, we support you, but we haven't got a union in where I work for it." Somehow because they think they're sort of uh, uh, almost like community activists, they don't need to be in a union. But then when things go wrong, my experience is things that really can go wrong. And it's and so that's a bit of a strange one, and I think actually civil society organisations, and it comes back to something that Zoe said about trying to tackle problems of pay, need to make a conscious decision that yes, their workers should be unionised. Secondly, on the question of pay, and it's one of the things that has given me a load of angst over the years, is about funders who think that people that work in the voluntary sector should get paid a pittance. I don't know whether it's some hangover from the 60s that people are doing voluntary work. It's mainly women and they must be earning pin money or what. But actually, the amount of arguments I've had over the years with funders been putting in grant applications who say, "Oh, well, what you're proposing to pay is too much." Um, um, it is really problematic. And so this conversation about pay equity really needs to happen with funders. And the third thing that I think we haven't mentioned really is about employment status. That and it happens in the wider sector, but it happens in the voluntary sector. One of the things that I was concerned about for many years while I was still working was the movement of black workers into worker status, agency work, short-term contracts, all that kind of things. And I think one of the problems about that's endemic in the voluntary sector, because of the lack of core funding, this creates real problems with pay, with people's status, with people's job security, and that whole and there's a race and gendered aspect to that as well in terms of how that plays out in terms of people's position in the sector and the dynamics of how discrimination then works.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I think lots of lots of really kind of helpful points. Um, Jonathan, do you want to say anything, or
Yeah,
shall I carry on?
we've got
Yeah.
a question that's come in that asks how